They said she abandoned her duty. They called her reckless, insubordinate, a disgrace to the uniform. But what they didn't tell you was this: Captain Amelia Strand didn't just refuse orders that day. She hijacked a $50 million fighter jet to prove the generals wrong, and in doing so, she saved 200 lives they were prepared to sacrifice. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The desert sun hammered down on Kerrigan Air Base like divine judgment, turning the tarmac into a shimmering lake of heat. It was 0547 hours, and Captain Amelia Strand stood beside her F-35C Lightning, running her pre-flight checks with the kind of methodical precision that had earned her the callsign Metronome. 15 years of service. 2 tours in hostile airspace. 0 incidents, 0 complaints. Her record was spotless, her reputation unshakable. At 38 years old, she was one of only 12 women qualified to fly the most advanced stealth fighter in the United States arsenal. She didn't wear that distinction like a badge. She wore it like breathing, necessary and unremarkable. Today's mission was supposed to be routine. A reconnaissance sweep over the Talmir corridor, a narrow strip of contested airspace where insurgent activity had been heating up over the past 3 weeks. Intelligence suggested weapon stockpiles. Command wanted eyes on the ground. Amelia was the eyes. She ran her gloved hand along the aircraft's sleek body, feeling the cool composite material beneath her fingertips. The jet was a masterpiece of engineering, a symphony of thrust, stealth, and lethality. But to her, it was more than machinery. It was an extension of her will, a second nervous system that responded to her instincts before her brain could finish the thought. Her flight suit hung perfectly tailored against her frame, patches sewn. With care, her squadron insignia, the American flag, her name in bold block letters. Strand, she adjusted her helmet, checked the oxygen flow, and reviewed the mission parameters one last time on her wrist-mounted tablet. Target zone, grid Echo 7, flight time, 48 minutes. Rules of engagement: observe and report. Do not engage unless fired upon. Simple, clean, exactly the kind of mission she'd flown 100 times before. But something felt different this morning. The air was too still, the base was too quiet. Normally, pre-dawn flights came with the hum of ground crew banter, the clang of tool carts, the distant roar of jets taxiing on adjacent runways. Today, there was only silence and the oppressive weight of heat pressing down on everything. Lieutenant Jenna Core, her wingman, approached from across the tarmac, helmet tucked under one arm. She was younger, only 29, but sharp as a blade and twice as loyal. They'd flown together for 2 years, and in that time, Jenna had learned to read Amelia's moods better than most people. They said she abandoned her duty. They called her reckless, insubordinate, a disgrace to the uniform. But what they didn't tell you was this: Captain Amelia Strand didn't just refuse orders that day. She hijacked a $50 million fighter jet to prove the generals wrong, and in doing so, she saved 200 lives they were prepared to sacrifice. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The desert sun hammered down on Kerrigan Air Base like divine judgment, turning the tarmac into a shimmering lake of heat. It was 0547 hours, and Captain Amelia Strand stood beside her F-35C Lightning, running her pre-flight checks with the kind of methodical precision that had earned her the callsign Metronome. 15 years of service. 2 tours in hostile airspace. 0 incidents, 0 complaints. Her record was spotless, her reputation unshakable. At 38 years old, she was one of only 12 women qualified to fly the most advanced stealth fighter in the United States arsenal. She didn't wear that distinction like a badge. She wore it like breathing, necessary and unremarkable. Today's mission was supposed to be routine. A reconnaissance sweep over the Talmir corridor, a narrow strip of contested airspace where insurgent activity had been heating up over the past 3 weeks. Intelligence suggested weapon stockpiles. Command wanted eyes on the ground. Amelia was the eyes. She ran her gloved hand along the aircraft's sleek body, feeling the cool composite material beneath her fingertips. The jet was a masterpiece of engineering, a symphony of thrust, stealth, and lethality. But to her, it was more than machinery. It was an extension of her will, a second nervous system that responded to her instincts before her brain could finish the thought. Her flight suit hung perfectly tailored against her frame, patches sewn. With care, her squadron insignia, the American flag, her name in bold block letters. Strand, she adjusted her helmet, checked the oxygen flow, and reviewed the mission parameters one last time on her wrist-mounted tablet. Target zone, grid Echo 7, flight time, 48 minutes, rules of engagement, observe and report. Do not engage unless fired upon. Simple, clean, exactly the kind of mission she'd flown 100 times before. But something felt different this morning. The air was too still, the base was too quiet. Normally, pre-dawn flights came with the hum of ground crew banter, the clang of tool carts, the distant roar of jets taxiing on adjacent runways. Today, there was only silence and the oppressive weight of heat pressing down on everything. Lieutenant Jenna Core, her wingman, approached from across the tarmac, helmet tucked under one arm. She was younger, only 29, but sharp as a blade and twice as loyal. They'd flown together for 2 years, and in that time, Jenna had learned to read Amelia's moods better than most people read weather. "You feel that?" Jenna asked, stopping a few feet away. "Feel what?" "Like we're walking into something we weren't briefed on." Amelia didn't answer immediately. She scanned the horizon, where the sun was just beginning to crest over the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of burnt orange and deep violet. Somewhere out there, beyond the wire, beyond the safe zone perimeter, people were waking up. Farmers, families, children getting ready for school in villages that had been bombed 3 times in the last decade. "Just stay sharp," Amelia said finally. "We're ghosts today, in and out." Jenna nodded, though her expression remained uncertain. She walked back toward her own aircraft, and Amelia returned her focus to the checklist. Inside the cockpit, everything was exactly where it should be. The multifunction displays glowed soft blue in the pre-dawn darkness. Her throttle responded with smooth resistance. The ejection seat harness locked into place with a satisfying click. She powered up the systems and listened to the gentle hum of the jet coming alive around her. Tower, this is Falcon 7, ready for pre-flight clearance. The radio crackled. "Falcon 7 Tower, you are cleared for engine start. Stand by for taxi instructions." She initiated the startup sequence, and the jet's twin engines roared to life with a deep, guttural growl that vibrated through her chest. The sound was primal, powerful, a reminder of the raw force she controlled with nothing more than her hands and her judgment. As she taxied toward the runway, the base slid past her canopy in a blur of gray concrete and chain-link fencing. Guard towers, hangars, rows of parked aircraft glinting in the early light. And beyond the perimeter, the vast expanse of desert, stretching endlessly toward a horizon that promised nothing but heat and dust. Tower gave her the final clearance. "Falcon 7, you are cleared for takeoff. Winds calm. Visibility unlimited. Good hunting." Amelia released the brakes, pushed the throttle forward, and felt the jet surge beneath her. The acceleration was immediate and brutal, pinning her back into her seat as the world outside became a streak of color and motion. The nose lifted, the wheels left the ground. And just like that, she was airborne. The earth fell away beneath her, shrinking into a patchwork of brown and tan. The sky opened up above her, infinite and blue, the kind of sky that made you feel small and significant all at once. She banked left, setting her course toward the tarmac corridor, and climbed steadily to cruising altitude. This was the part she lived for. Not the combat, not the adrenaline, but this, the solitude of flight, the sensation of being untethered from gravity and consequence, suspended between earth and heaven with nothing but skill and speed to keep her alive. Jenna's voice crackled over the radio. Falcon 7, this is Falcon 8. Forming on your 6. Copy Falcon 8. Stay tight. They flew in formation, two shadows slicing through the morning sky, invisible to radar, undetectable to enemy systems. The tarmac corridor appeared on her display as a narrow red zone, flanked by mountains on both sides. Intelligence had marked 3 potential targets: a suspected weapons cache, a convoy staging area, and a communications outpost. Her orders were clear: observe, document, report. But orders, Amelia had learned, were written by people who never had to look civilians in the eye. And today, that distinction would matter more than anyone could have predicted. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The flight to the tarmac corridor was uneventful. 42 minutes of empty sky, steady altitude, and the rhythmic pulse of her breath inside the helmet. Jenna's voice cut in, quiet and tense. Amelia, what are we doing? Amelia didn't answer. Her mind was racing, running through every protocol, every regulation, every piece of training she'd absorbed over 15 years. Rules of engagement were clear: confirm hostile intent before marking the target. Civilian casualties were to be avoided at all costs. But orders from a general were also clear: obey or face consequences. She toggled her radio to a private channel. Jenna, do you see what I'm seeing? Yeah, families, kids, no weapons. Then we're in agreement. Amelia, if you refuse this order, I know what happens. She switched back to the main channel and spoke with deliberate calm. Every word measured and final. Command actual. This is Falcon 7. I cannot in good conscience mark a civilian target. Request confirmation of intelligence source and authorization for ground assessment before proceeding. The response was immediate and venomous. Captain Strand, you are hereby ordered to return to base immediately. Your refusal to comply with a direct order will be documented and reviewed. Falcon 8 will complete the mission. Amelia's heart pounded, but her hands remained steady on the controls. She glanced at her wingman's position on the display. Jenna's voice came through, shaky but resolute. Command, this is Falcon 8. I confirm Captain Strand's assessment. No hostile activity observed. Request mission abort. Another silence. This one felt heavier, suffocating. When General Creel spoke again, his voice was ice. Both of you are ordered to return to base immediately. This mission will be completed by alternate assets. Your insubordination will be addressed upon landing. Do not deviate from your flight path. Do not communicate further. Is that understood? Amelia closed her eyes for a brief moment, then opened them and stared down at the village below. The children were still playing. The man was still carrying firewood. They had no idea that somewhere above them, in the cold machinery of military command, their lives had already been marked for deletion. Understood. Command. She pulled back on the stick, climbing away from the corridor. Jenna followed, silent and tense. As they banked toward home, Amelia's mind was already calculating. She had maybe 40 minutes before they landed. 40 minutes before she would be placed under arrest. 40 minutes before her career, her reputation, and possibly her freedom would be stripped away. But none of that mattered, because 5 minutes after she and Jenna cleared the airspace, she heard it, a new flight designation on the radio. Reaper 3, you are cleared hot. Payload authorized. Strike on target waypoint Alpha in 60 seconds. Amelia's blood went cold. They were going to do it anyway. She toggled her display, pulling up the tactical map. A bomber squadron, already inbound. Weapons armed. Target locked. The village didn't have 60 seconds. It had less. Jenna's voice crackled through, desperate. Amelia, they're really doing it. They're going to die. I know. Her hand hovered over the throttle. Her eyes scanned the horizon. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She had two choices. Follow orders, land at Kerrigan, face the court-martial, and live with the fact that she had flown away while 200 people were incinerated for a lie, or do something no pilot in the history of the Air Force had ever done. Amelia Strand made her choice. She broke formation. Falcon 8, return to base. That's an order. Amelia, what are you? Go home. Jenna, now. She slammed the throttle forward, feeling the raw power of the F-35 surge beneath her as she banked hard, reversing course. Her display lit up with warnings. Proximity alerts. Unauthorized deviation. Command override required. The radio exploded with voices. Falcon 7, you are off course. Return to your flight path immediately. Captain Strand, cease maneuvers and respond. All units be advised, Falcon 7 has gone rogue. Repeat, Falcon 7 is non-compliant. Amelia didn't respond. She silenced the radio, locked her targeting systems, and dove back toward the Talmere corridor at full speed. Behind her, the entire chain of command was about to realize something terrifying. She wasn't returning to base. She was going back to stop them. The F-35 screamed through the sky at Mach 1.2, tearing across the desert in a blur of steel and defiance. Amelia's hands moved with mechanical precision, adjusting trim, managing throttle. Her eyes locked on the tactical display, where two blips were converging on the village Reaper 3 and Reaper 4. Heavy bombers carrying enough ordnance to level an entire city block. She had maybe 90 seconds. Her helmet radio erupted with overlapping voices, commanders shouting over each other, trying to regain control of a situation that had already slipped through their fingers like sand. Falcon 7, this is Command Actual. You are in direct violation of all units. Falcon 7 is to be considered hostile. Do not engage unless Reaper flight, be advised. Rogue aircraft inbound to your position. Amelia reached down and flipped a series of switches, shutting down her IFF transponder. In an instant, she vanished from friendly radar, becoming a ghost in the system. The voices in her helmet cut out as she severed the command frequency entirely. Now there was only the sound of her breath, steady and rhythmic, and the low hum of the jet systems. She dove lower, skimming just above the canyon ridges, using the terrain to mask her approach. The Talmere corridor opened up ahead of her, the village visible now as a small cluster of tan structures against the rust-colored earth. She could see movement below, people going about their lives, unaware that death was hurtling toward them from 20,000 feet above. Her targeting computer beeped. She had a lock on Reaper 3, not to destroy it, but to stop it. She armed her electronic countermeasures and prepared to do something that would either save 200 lives or end her own. The plan was insane. It violated every protocol, every rule of engagement, every oath she had taken. But it was the only plan that mattered. Reaper 3's pilot came over the emergency frequency, his voice tense. Unknown aircraft, you are in restricted airspace. Identify yourself immediately or be fired upon. Amelia keyed her mic once, just long enough for them to hear her voice. Reaper 3, this is Captain Amelia Strand, callsign Falcon 7. Abort your strike. You are targeting civilians. There was a pause. Then a different voice, older, harder. Captain Strand, you are ordered to clear the area immediately. We have authorization from command. This strike is happening. Not while I'm here, it's not. She punched the throttle and rocketed upward, positioning herself directly between the bombers and the village below. Her altimeter climbed rapidly 8,000 feet, 12,000, 15,000. She leveled off at 18,000 feet, directly in the flight path of the incoming strike. Falcon 7. Move now, negative. Captain, we will not abort. You need to get out of the way. Then you'll have to go through me. The radio went silent. She imagined the pilots in those bombers staring at their screens, seeing her jet hovering between them and their target, a single fighter blocking a billion-dollar military operation. They were probably calling back to command, asking for guidance, waiting for someone with enough rank to tell them what to do. But Amelia wasn't waiting. She toggled her weapon system and did something that would later be described in every court document, every news report, every investigation as the most reckless act of insubordination in modern military history. She locked her missile targeting system onto Reaper 3, not to fire, but to make them believe she would. The bomber's threat warning system screamed. She could hear it faintly over the emergency channel, a high-pitched wail that told the pilots they were being painted by hostile radar, that a missile lock was active, that they were seconds away from being blown out of the sky. Falcon 7. What the hell are you doing? Abort the strike or I will engage. You're bluffing. Try me. Her finger hovered over the trigger. She wouldn't actually fire. She couldn't. Shooting down a friendly aircraft was an act of treason, punishable by life in prison or worse. But they didn't know that. They didn't know if she'd already crossed so many lines that one more didn't matter. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then, finally, the voice came back, quieter now, uncertain. Reaper 3 to command. We have a situation, requesting immediate guidance. Another voice cut in, this one sharp with barely contained rage. General Creel. Reaper flight, maintain your course. Falcon 7 will not fire. She's grandstanding. Complete your mission. Amelia's jaw clenched. He was calling her bluff. And he was right. She wouldn't shoot down those bombers. But there was one thing she could still do. She disengaged the missile lock and rolled inverted, diving toward the village at full speed. Her altimeter unwound rapidly. 15,000 feet. 10,000. 5,000. She activated her countermeasures, releasing a cloud of chaff and flares that lit up the sky like a fireworks display, filling the airspace with radar reflective debris. Falcon 7 ceased jamming immediately. She didn't respond. She kept diving, kept flooding the airspace with electronic noise, making it impossible for the bombers to get a clean targeting solution. If they dropped their payload now, they'd be firing blind, and even command wouldn't authorize that. Too much risk of hitting nothing. Too much risk of an international incident if the bombs went wide. She leveled off at 2,000 feet, directly above the village, and began a tight circular pattern. Her jet a shield of metal and thrust between the bombers and the ground. All units. This is General Creel. Falcon 7 is to be intercepted and forced down immediately. Scramble fighters from Kerrigan. Authorization granted for weapons-free engagement if she does not comply. Amelia's heart pounded. Weapons-free. That meant they would shoot her down if necessary. She checked her fuel. 15 minutes of flight time left, maybe less if she kept burning at this rate. The bombers were still circling above, waiting for orders, waiting for her to run out of options. But then something happened that no one had anticipated. Jenna's voice came over the emergency frequency, clear and steady. Command, this is Falcon 8. I'm returning to the corridor. Falcon 7 is not alone. Amelia's breath caught. Jenna, no. Go back to base. Not a chance. Within seconds, Jenna's F-35 appeared on the tactical display, racing back toward the Talmere corridor at full speed. She took up position on Amelia's wing, matching her altitude, her course, her defiance. 2 fighters now blocking the strike zone, someone reported over the command channel. Disbelief thick in their voice. General Creel's voice was venomous. "Captain Core, you are disobeying a direct order. Return to base immediately or face court-martial." Jenna's response was calm, almost amused. "With respect, General, I think we're already past that point." Amelia glanced at her wingman's jet, flying just off her starboard side, and felt something tight in her chest loosen just slightly. She wasn't alone. Whatever happened next, she wasn't facing it alone. The bombers began to pull away, their mission aborted, their pilots unwilling to risk a mid-air collision or a friendly fire incident. Amelia watched them retreat on her display, their blips growing smaller, fading into the distance. Below, the village remained untouched. The children still played. The woman still cooked. The man still carried firewood. They would never know how close they had come. Amelia's radio crackled one last time. General Creel's voice was quiet now, cold and final. "Captain Strand, Captain Core, you are both under arrest. Land your aircraft at Kerrigan Air Base immediately, or you will be shot down. This is your last warning." Amelia stared at the horizon, at the base somewhere beyond it, at the future that was waiting for her there. Court-martial, dishonorable discharge, prison maybe, but 200 people were still alive. She keyed her mic. "Understood, Command. We're coming in." She banked toward home, Jenna beside her, and began the long flight back to face the consequences of doing the right thing. The landing at Kerrigan Air Base was nothing like the takeoff when Amelia had left that morning. The sky had been empty, the base quiet, the world still holding its breath in the pre-dawn darkness. Now as she approached the runway with Jenna on her wing, the entire base had mobilized like a disturbed anthill. Security vehicles lined the taxiway, their lights flashing red and blue against the concrete. Armed personnel stood at attention every 50 feet, weapons held across their chests, faces hidden behind visors and tactical gear. A ring of military police vehicles had formed a perimeter around the designated landing area, creating a corridor that felt less like a welcome home and more like a gauntlet. "Falcon 7, you are cleared to land on runway 29er. Proceed directly to the marked holding area. Do not deviate. Do not exit your aircraft until instructed." Amelia didn't respond. She adjusted her approach, lowering her landing gear, feeling the satisfying thunk as the wheels locked into position. The runway rose up to meet her, and the tires kissed the asphalt with barely a sound. Perfect landing. Muscle memory and 15 years of training, executing flawlessly even as her world fell apart. She taxied slowly toward the holding area, following the ground crew's illuminated wands. Jenna landed 30 seconds behind her, equally precise, equally controlled. They parked side by side, engines still running, canopies still closed. Through her cockpit glass, Amelia could see the crowd gathering. Officers in dress uniforms, investigators with clipboards, cameras on tripods, positioned to document everything. And standing front and center, arms crossed over his chest like a judge awaiting execution, was General Tobias Creel. He looked exactly as she'd imagined. Late 60s, silver hair cropped military short, jaw like a steel trap, eyes that could strip paint off a fighter jet at 50 paces. 3 stars gleamed on his shoulders. Ribbons covered his chest in a rainbow of commendations earned over 3 decades of service. He was a monument to military discipline, and she had just committed the ultimate sin in his eyes. She had disobeyed. "Falcon 7, shut down your engines and exit the aircraft. Keep your hands visible at all times." Amelia took a long breath, then began the shutdown sequence. One by one, the systems powered down. The engines wound down from a roar to a whisper to silence. The cockpit lights dimmed. And then there was nothing but the sound of her own breathing inside the helmet. She unstrapped, popped the canopy, and felt the desert heat wash over her like a physical slap. The air tasted like dust and consequences. Military police moved in immediately. surrounding her aircraft before her boots even touched the ground. She climbed down the ladder slowly, deliberately, keeping her movements smooth and non-threatening. Her flight suit clung to her skin, soaked with sweat. Her legs felt unsteady after hours in the cockpit, but she forced them to hold the moment her feet hit the tarmac. A senior MP stepped forward, his expression carved from stone. "Captain Amelia Strand, you are hereby detained pending investigation into charges of insubordination, unauthorized deviation from mission parameters, and reckless endangerment of military assets." He reached for her arm, but she pulled it back. "Just slightly, I can walk. You'll do what you're told." 2 more MPs closed in, gripping her arms on both sides, their fingers digging into her biceps hard enough to bruise. They marched her forward, past rows of silent personnel, past officers who wouldn't meet her eyes, past ground crew who had serviced her jet 100 times, and now looked at her like she was a stranger. Jenna was being escorted off her own aircraft 20 feet away, her face pale but defiant, her jaw set in a way that said she regretted nothing. General Creel stepped into Amelia's path, forcing the MPs to halt. He studied her for a long moment, his gaze moving from her flight suit to her face, searching for something: fear, regret, an apology. He found none of it. "Captain Strand," he said, his voice low and cold, "do you have any idea what you've done?" "Yes, sir. You disobeyed a direct order from your commanding officer. You jeopardized a critical military operation. You turned a $60 million fighter jet into your personal crusade and dragged another officer down with you." Amelia met his eyes without flinching. "I stopped an illegal strike on a civilian target." Creel's jaw tightened. "Illegal? You don't get to decide what's legal, Captain. That's not your job. Your job is to follow orders. Your job is to trust that the people above you have information you don't. Your job is to execute the mission, not to question it. My job is to uphold the rules of engagement." Civilians were not hostile. There was no imminent threat. Striking that village would have been a war crime. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Cameras zoomed in. The word "war crime" hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Creel leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "You just ended your career. You know that, don't you? Everything you've worked for. 15 years of service, gone, and for what? A handful of people in a village that won't even know your name?" Amelia didn't answer. She didn't need to. Creel straightened, his expression hardening into something final and absolute. "Take her to the brig. Both of them. Full isolation. No visitors. No communications. They stay there until the court-martial convenes." The MPs tightened their grip and began pulling her forward, but Amelia twisted just enough to look back at her jet. See whisper no, wrong plane. Her F-35, tail number 4517. It sat on the tarmac like a sleeping predator, unmarked, unbowed, exactly as she'd left it. They walked her across the base in full view of everyone. Past the hangars where mechanics paused their work to stare. Past the administrative buildings where officers watched from windows. Past the mess hall where enlisted personnel gathered at the doors, whispering, pointing, pulling out their phones. Someone was recording. She could feel it. The weight of documentation, the eyes of judgment. The slow grind of military justice preparing to crush her into dust. They reached the detention facility. A squat concrete building on the edge of the base that looked more like a bunker than a prison. The door clanged shut behind her with the finality of a coffin lid inside. The air was cool and stale. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The walls were painted institutional beige, the kind of color designed to break your spirit through sheer blandness. An intake officer sat behind a desk, barely looking up as they brought her in. Name: Captain Amelia Strand. Service number. She recited it. Personal effects. All of them. They took her watch. Her wedding ring, no, she wasn't married. Her dog tags. The small leather notebook she kept in her chest pocket. Even her boots, replacing them with canvas slip-ons that felt like surrender on her feet. They led her down a narrow corridor lined with cells. Steel doors with small windows. Each one identical, anonymous, designed to erase individuality. The door to cell 7 swung open, and they guided her inside. The cell was 8 feet by 10. A metal cot bolted to the wall. A toilet in the corner with no seat. A single bare bulb in the ceiling, protected by a wire cage. No windows. No clock. No way to mark the passage of time except by the rhythm of meal trays sliding through the slot in the door. The MPs stepped back. You'll have a visitor tomorrow. Legal counsel. Until then, you don't talk to anyone. Understood? Amelia nodded once. The door slammed shut, and the lock engaged with a heavy mechanical click. She stood in the center of the cell. Still in her flight suit, still smelling of jet fuel and sweat and the desert wind. Her body ached from hours in the cockpit. Her wrists were already darkening with bruises where the MPs had gripped too hard. Her shoulders throbbed from the tension of flying at combat speed for so long. But she didn't sit. Not yet. She stood there in the silence, in the buzzing fluorescent light, and let herself feel the full weight of what she'd done. The career she'd ended. The future she'd sacrificed. The certainty that tomorrow, or the day after, or the day after that, they would convene a court-martial and find her guilty of every charge. They could think of Dot, and then she thought about the village. The children playing soccer. The woman cooking. The man carrying firewood, still alive, still breathing, still unaware. Amelia sat down on the cot, rested her back against the cold concrete wall, and closed her eyes. She had no regrets, not one. 3 days passed in the brig, before anyone came to see her. 3 days of fluorescent buzz and concrete silence. 3 days of cold metal trays shoved through the door, slapped twice a day powdered eggs, stale bread, something that might have been meat. 3 days of counting the rivets in the ceiling, mapping the cracks in the floor, measuring time by the ache in her muscles and the slow fade of bruises on her wrists. Amelia didn't waste energy on anger. She did push-ups until her arms shook. She paced the cell, keeping her legs strong. She reviewed every decision she'd made in the cockpit, every calculation, every maneuver, looking for mistakes. She found none. On the morning of the 4th day, the door opened. A woman in a crisp Air Force officer's uniform stepped inside, carrying a leather briefcase and an expression that revealed nothing. She was in her mid-40s, dark hair pulled back severely, sharp eyes that assessed everything in half a second. Captain's bars on her shoulders. JAG insignia on her collar. Captain Strand. I'm Captain Lydia Holt, Judge Advocate General's Corps. I've been assigned as your defense counsel. Amelia stood from the cot, instinctively straightening despite the wrinkled flight suit she'd been wearing for 4 days. How's Jenna? Holt's eyebrow lifted slightly. Captain Corps is being held in a separate facility. She's unharmed. Her court-martial is scheduled separately from yours. She was following my lead. Whatever charges you're bringing, they should fall on me. That's not how this works. Holt set her briefcase on the small metal table bolted to the wall and opened it with precise movements. And it's not your decision to make. Right now, you need to focus on your own situation, which is to put it mildly catastrophic. She pulled out a thick folder and laid it open. Page after page of typed charges, incident reports, witness statements, flight data downloaded directly from Amelia's jet. Willful disobedience of a lawful order. Unauthorized deviation from assigned mission. Reckless operation of military aircraft. Threatening friendly forces. Jamming military communications. Interfering with authorized combat operations. Conduct unbecoming an officer. Holt looked up. They're building a case that could put you in Leavenworth for 20 years. Amelia sat down slowly, her eyes scanning the documents. I stopped them from bombing civilians. That's not what the report says. According to intelligence, that village was a confirmed hostile position. Weapons cache verified by multiple sources. Your refusal to engage put American lives at risk and allowed enemy assets to remain operational. That's a lie. Can you prove it? Amelia opened her mouth, then closed it. Her evidence was what she'd seen with her own eyes. Children playing, families living, no weapons, no fortifications. But against satellite imagery that could be doctored, intelligence reports that could be falsified, and the testimony of generals who'd never even been there. Her word meant nothing. Holt sat across from her, folding her hands on the table. Here's what's going to happen. In 72 hours, you'll face a general court-martial. 3 senior officers will serve as the panel. The prosecutor is Colonel Raymond Finch. He's never lost a case. The entire proceeding will be recorded, possibly televised, and used as an example to every officer in the military about what happens when you go rogue. I didn't go rogue. I followed the rules of engagement. You pointed a weapons system at a friendly aircraft. I didn't fire. You threatened to. You created a hostile situation where none existed. You forced the abort of a lawful military operation based on your personal judgment, which according to General Creel and every commander in your chain, you are not qualified to make. Amelia felt the walls of the cell pressing closer. So that's it? They rewrite the facts, bury the truth, and I just accept it? Holt was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, almost sympathetic. Captain Strand, I've been doing this for 18 years. I've defended officers accused of far less, and I've watched good people get destroyed because they thought being right was enough. It's not. The military doesn't reward righteousness. It rewards compliance. Then why are you here? Because it's my job. Holt closed the folder. And because, off the record, I think you got screwed. But that doesn't matter. What matters is building a defense that keeps you out of prison. What kind of defense? The only kind we have. We argue diminished capacity, that the stress of the mission impaired your judgment. We say you made an error in assessment, that you genuinely believed the target was civilian, and that your actions, while misguided, came from a place of trying to uphold the law. We express remorse. We request leniency. We hope the panel shows mercy. Amelia stared at her. You want me to say I was wrong. I want you to survive this. By lying, by being smart. Holt leaned forward. You can stand on principle and spend the next 2 decades in a cell, or you can bend enough to walk out of this with a dishonorable discharge and your freedom. That's the choice. Amelia looked down at her hands. The bruises had faded to yellow-green, but the marks were still there. She thought about the cell door slamming shut, the fluorescent lights, the endless days of nothing. She thought about 20 years of this. Then she thought about the village. No, Holt sighed. Captain, I won't say I was wrong. I won't apologize for saving lives. If that means I go to prison, then that's what happens. You're throwing away your life. I'm keeping my integrity. Holt stared at her for a long moment, then gathered her papers and stood. Then I'll do what I can. But understand this, you're going to lose. And when you do, don't expect anyone to remember why. She knocked on the door. The guard opened it, and she stepped out without looking back. Amelia sat alone again, listening to the lock engage, the footsteps fade. The silence return. 72 hours. 3 days until her court-martial. 3 days until the military made an example of her. But something was happening outside. The walls of her cell that neither she nor Captain Holt could have predicted. Something that would turn a closed military tribunal into a national reckoning. Because while Amelia sat in isolation, forbidden from speaking to anyone, the world outside had started speaking for her. Video footage had leaked, not official recordings, not sanitized reports, but raw, unfiltered phone video from the tarmac, filmed by ground crew and maintenance workers and enlisted personnel who'd watched her being marched across the base in restraints, who'd heard the whispers about what she'd done, who'd seen the look on General Creel's face when she'd used the words war crime. The first video appeared on social media 18 hours after her detention. 30 seconds of shaky footage showing Amelia being escorted by armed guards, her flight suit wrinkled, her face exhausted but defiant. The caption read, "Fighter pilot arrested for refusing to bomb civilians. They're calling her a traitor. I call her a hero." It had 10,000 views in an hour, 100,000 by morning, million by the end of the day. Then more videos surfaced. Someone had recorded the radio chatter from the mission, the moment she'd told General Creel she wouldn't mark the target. Someone else had captured Jenna's return to the corridor, her refusal to abandon her wingmen. Fragments of the story, scattered across the internet like pieces of shrapnel. News outlets picked it up. Military analysts debated it. Former pilots weighed in. Some called her insubordinate, reckless, a danger to good order and discipline. Others called her courageous, principled, exactly the kind of officer the country needed. Within 48 hours, #StandWithStrand was trending globally. Protest groups formed outside Kerrigan Air Base, holding signs that read, "She saved lives," and "Courts martial conscience." Politicians issued statements. Veterans organizations demanded transparency. The Secretary of Defense was forced to hold a press conference where she promised a full and fair investigation. But inside her cell, Amelia knew none of this. She sat in silence, counting down the hours, preparing herself for a trial she couldn't win, unaware that her name was being spoken in every corner of the world, unaware that her silence was about to become the loudest voice in the room. The courtroom was sterile and imposing, designed to remind everyone who entered that justice here was measured in regulations, not morality. 3 long tables arranged in a U-shape, the panel of officers seated at the head like judges at an inquisition. Behind them, the American flag hung motionless, its colors muted under harsh fluorescent lights. Amelia sat at the defense table in her dress uniform, every ribbon and badge polished to mirror shine, every crease sharp enough to cut. They'd given her 2 hours to shower, shave, and prepare before marching her into this room. She'd spent 1 hour cleaning herself and 59 minutes staring at the mirror, memorizing the face of the woman who might spend the next 20 years behind bars. Captain Holt sat beside her, papers arranged in neat stacks, her expression professionally neutral. Across the room, Colonel Raymond Finch reviewed his notes with the calm confidence of a man who'd never lost. He was in his late 50s, gray at the temples, with the kind of sharp features that made him look perpetually skeptical. His reputation preceded him 12 years as a prosecutor. 43 cases, 43 convictions. The gallery was packed. Military personnel filled the back rows, forbidden from recording but allowed to witness. Journalists sat behind a glass partition, cameras rolling, broadcasting this moment to millions. Outside the building, protesters lined the fence, their chants muted but persistent. The presiding officer, Colonel Nathaniel York, called the court to order with a sharp rap of his gavel. He was in his 60s, lean and weathered, with eyes that had seen 3 wars and too many courtrooms, just like this one. Beside him sat 2 other panel members, Major Patricia Wells, a logistics officer with a reputation for strict adherence to protocol, and Lieutenant Colonel Richard Moss, a former pilot who'd flown combat missions in 2 theaters. "This court-martial is convened to address charges against Captain Amelia Strand," York announced, his voice filling the room with bureaucratic authority. "Captain Strand, you are charged with willful disobedience of orders. reckless endangerment of military assets, and conduct unbecoming an officer. How do you plead? Amelia stood, her spine straight, her hands at her sides. Not guilty. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Finch's expression didn't change, but something in his posture suggested satisfaction. Not guilty meant a fight. And fights were what he won. The prosecution may proceed, York said. Finch rose smoothly, buttoning his jacket as he approached the center of the room. He moved like a performer, every gesture calculated for maximum impact. Members of the panel, what you are about to hear is not a story of courage or conscience. It is a story of ego, arrogance, and catastrophic failure of judgment. He turned to face Amelia, his gaze cold. Captain Amelia Strand is a decorated pilot with 15 years of service. That makes what she did even more inexcusable. He clicked a remote, and a screen behind him flickered to life, displaying a tactical map of the Talmere corridor. On the morning in question, Captain Strand was assigned a reconnaissance mission. Her orders were clear: observe, mark targets, report. Simple, routine. She had flown missions like this dozens of times. But on this day, Captain Strand decided that her judgment was superior to that of her commanding officers, superior to military intelligence, superior to generals with decades of experience. Another click. The screen showed satellite imagery of the village, grainy, black and white, taken from 20,000 feet. This is the target in question. Intelligence identified this location as a weapons cache and insurgent staging area. 3 separate sources confirmed hostile activity. Captain Strand was ordered to mark this target for strike authorization. She refused. Finch paced slowly, letting his words settle. She didn't request clarification. She didn't ask for additional reconnaissance. She simply decided, based on nothing more than her own visual assessment, that military intelligence was wrong. And then, when ordered to comply, she did something unprecedented. The screen changed again, showing flight data, her trajectory, her sudden reversal, her return to the corridor. She broke formation. She ignored direct orders from General Tobias Creel. She flew back to the target zone and positioned herself between authorized strike aircraft and their objective. And then, Finch paused for effect. She locked her weapons system onto a friendly bomber, threatening to shoot it down if the mission proceeded. Gasps from the gallery. Even though everyone in the room had read the reports, hearing it stated so baldly was shocking. Captain Strand turned a $60 million fighter jet into a personal crusade. She endangered the lives of fellow pilots. She compromised a critical military operation. And she did it all because she thought she knew better than everyone else. Finch walked back to his table, then turned for his closing. This is not about right or wrong. This is about order, discipline, the chain of command that keeps our military functioning. If every officer decided they could pick and choose which orders to follow, we would have chaos. Captain Strand may believe her intentions were noble, but intentions don't matter. Actions do. And her actions violated every oath she ever took. He sat down. The room was silent except for the hum of the ventilation system and the distant chants of protesters. Outside. Colonel York looked at Holt. Defense. Your opening statement. Holt stood, and for a moment, Amelia wondered what she could possibly say. How do you defend the indefensible? How do you argue against facts that were documented, recorded, undeniable? But when Holt spoke, her voice was steady and clear. Members of the panel, the prosecution wants you to believe this case is about disobedience. It's not. It's about what we ask our officers to do when the orders they receive are illegal. Finch started to object, but York raised a hand. I'll allow it. Continue, Captain. Holt walked to the center of the room, her movements deliberate. Captain Strand is a 15-year veteran with a flawless record. She has flown in combat. She has commanded under fire. She has never once disobeyed an order, until the day she was told to mark a civilian village for destruction. She clicked her own remote. The screen changed to show a clearer image of the village, taken from Amelia's targeting pod. You could see the details now: the laundry hanging between houses, the courtyard where children played, the cooking fire, the people. This is what Captain Strand saw. Not satellite imagery, not intelligence reports, but actual, real-time visual confirmation. And what she saw were families, children, non-combatants engaged in daily life. No weapons, no fortifications, no hostile activity. Holt let the image sit on the screen. The rules of engagement are clear. Before marking a target for strike, a pilot must confirm hostile intent. Captain Strand followed those rules. She assessed the target. She saw civilians, and she refused to mark them for death. She turned to face the panel directly. The prosecution says she should have trusted intelligence. But intelligence is not infallible. We have bombed weddings thinking they were terrorist meetings. We have destroyed hospitals thinking they were weapons depots. And every time, we say the same thing. We relied on bad intelligence, but Captain Strand had good intelligence, her own eyes. And she chose to trust what she could see over what she was told. Finch stood. Objection. Defense is arguing facts, not in evidence. There has been no determination that the intelligence was flawed. Sustained, York said. Captain Holt, confine your statements to established facts. Holt nodded. Captain Strand made a decision in real time, under pressure, based on her assessment of the situation. She believed and continues to believe that following the order she was given would have resulted in the deaths of innocent people. And she was willing to sacrifice her career, her freedom, and her future to prevent that. She walked back to the defense table. That's not arrogance. That's conscience. And if we court-martial officers for having one, then we've lost something essential about who we are. She sat down. The room remained silent for a long moment. Then Colonel York spoke. The prosecution may call its first witness. Finch stood again. The prosecution calls General Tobias Creel. The courtroom door opened, and General Creel entered, his uniform immaculate, his bearing that of a man who had never doubted himself in his life. He took the witness stand, was sworn in, and sat with military precision. Finch approached. General Creel, can you describe your role on the day in question? I was operational commander for the Talmir corridor strike. I authorized the mission based on verified intelligence indicating hostile activity at the target location. And when Captain Strand refused to mark the target, what did you do? I ordered her to comply. When she refused, I ordered her to return to base. When she returned to the corridor and interfered with the strike, I ordered her arrest. At any point did Captain Strand request additional intelligence or clarification? No. Did she present any evidence that the intelligence was flawed? No. She based her refusal solely on her own visual assessment, which is not protocol. Finch nodded. Thank you, General. Holt stood for cross-examination. General Creel, have you ever been to the village in question? No. Have you seen it with your own eyes? I rely on intelligence reports and satellite imagery. So you've never personally verified whether there were civilians present? Creel's jaw tightened. That's not how operational command works, Captain. But Captain Strand did see it. She was there. And she saw families, children. Does that give you any pause? Pilots are not intelligence analysts. Their job is to execute, not evaluate. Even if executing means killing innocents? Objection! Finch was on his feet. Argumentative and assumes facts not in evidence. Sustained. Captain Holt, rephrase or move on. Holt studied Creel for a moment longer, then nodded. No further questions. Creel stepped down, and as he passed Amelia's table, their eyes met for just a second. His expression was granite. Hers was unreadable. The trial continued through the afternoon. Witness after witness, flight data analysts, intelligence officers, fellow pilots who testified about the importance of following orders. Each one building the prosecution's case, brick by brick. And through it all, Amelia sat in silence, her face calm, her hands folded on the table. She didn't fidget, didn't whisper to her lawyer, didn't show fear or regret. She simply waited, because she knew something that no one else in that room knew yet. The truth was coming, and when it arrived, everything would change. The trial recessed for the evening. But the world outside the courtroom didn't sleep. By the time Amelia was escorted back to her cell, the footage from the day's proceedings had been dissected by every news outlet from Washington to Tokyo. Legal experts debated the finer points of military law on cable news. Veterans called into radio shows, their voices cracking with emotion as they argued about duty versus conscience. Social media exploded with takes so hot they could melt steel. But something else was happening. Something quieter and far more dangerous to the prosecution's case. People were digging. Investigative journalists. The kind who thrived on government secrets and institutional cover-ups. Had latched onto one detail from the trial. The intelligence reports that had supposedly confirmed the village as a hostile target. 3 separate sources, General Creel had said. Verified intelligence. But where had those reports come from? A freelance reporter named Marcus Chun, no relation to anyone in the story, had spent the last 4 days tracking down former intelligence analysts, comparing satellite imagery timestamps, and cross-referencing operational logs that had been partially declassified under Freedom of Information Act requests. What he found made his hands shake as he typed. The intelligence reports hadn't come from 3 independent sources. They'd come from one source, recycled through 3 different channels to make them appear corroborated. The original assessment had been filed by a contractor intelligence firm that had a history of inflating threats to justify continued operations and continued contracts. Satellite imagery showed structures at the village location, yes. But the thermal signatures that were supposed to indicate weapons caches, they were cooking fires. The vehicle movements that suggested militant activity, a farmer's truck making supply runs to neighboring settlements. The intelligence wasn't just flawed. It was fabricated. Chun published his findings at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday night. In a lengthy article titled, "The Strike That Never Should Have Been, How Faulty Intelligence Nearly Killed 200 Civilians." It went viral in minutes. By morning, every major news organization was scrambling to verify Chun's reporting. The Department of Defense issued a terse, no comment. The intelligence contractor refused to speak to journalists. And General Creel's office released a statement saying that operational intelligence was classified and couldn't be discussed publicly. But the damage was done. The narrative had shifted. This wasn't about an insubordinate pilot anymore. This was about a system that had tried to cover up a near massacre, and a woman who'd been willing to sacrifice everything to stop it. The second day of the trial, open to a courtroom, packed beyond capacity. Extra security had been called in to manage the crowds outside. Journalists fought for position behind the glass partition. And Colonel York entered looking like a man who'd spent the night reading the same news articles everyone else had. "This court will come to order," he announced, his voice tight. "Before we proceed, I want to address the media coverage of this trial. What happens in this courtroom is based on evidence presented here, not speculation in the press. Panel members are instructed to disregard any external reporting and focus solely on the facts before them." It was a nice sentiment, but everyone in the room knew it was impossible. Finch stood to call his next witness. But before he could speak, Captain Holt rose. "Your Honor, the defense requests permission to call a witness." York frowned. "Captain, the prosecution hasn't rested yet. I understand, sir. But new information has come to light that is directly relevant to this case. I'm requesting an exception to procedure. Finch objected immediately. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The defense can call witnesses during their portion of the trial. This witness is time-sensitive, Holt pressed. And their testimony directly contradicts the intelligence claims made by the prosecution. York studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I'll allow it. But Captain Holt, this had better be relevant. It is, sir. Holt walked to the courtroom door and opened it. A man in civilian clothes entered late 30s, carrying a messenger bag, looking distinctly uncomfortable in the military setting. He had the rumpled appearance of someone who'd been working around the clock and the nervous energy of someone who knew he was about to detonate a bomb. Please state your name and occupation for the record. York said, Daniel Pritchard. I'm a senior intelligence analyst with the Defense Intelligence Agency. A murmur ran through the gallery. An active DIA analyst testifying in a court-martial. This was unprecedented. Holt approached. Mr. Pritchard, can you explain your role in the intelligence assessment for the Telmere corridor operation? I was the lead analyst responsible for verifying target packages for strike authorization in that region. And were you involved in the assessment of the village that Captain Strand was ordered to mark? Pritchard hesitated, glancing at the panel, then at the gallery. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, deciding whether to jump. Yes. Can you describe that assessment? He took a breath. The initial report came from a private contractor, Redstone Analytics. They claimed multiple sources confirmed weapon storage and insurgent activity at the location. My job was to verify that claim using our own intelligence. And did you? Another pause. Longer this time, no. The courtroom erupted. York's gavel came down hard, restoring order, but the damage was done. Reporters were typing frantically. The gallery was buzzing. Finch looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. Explain, Holt said quietly. I found discrepancies in the thermal data. The signatures didn't match weapon storage. They were consistent with residential activity. I filed a dissenting assessment, recommending additional reconnaissance before authorizing any strike. And what happened to that assessment? It was overridden. My superior told me the operation had already been greenlit at the command level and that my report would only cause delays. So the strike was authorized despite your concerns? Yes. Holt let that sit for a moment. Mr. Pritchard, why are you testifying today? He looked at Amelia for the first time. Because I've been watching this trial. And I've been watching everyone call Captain Strand a traitor for doing what I should have done, standing up and saying no. His voice cracked slightly. She saw what I saw in the data. She saw civilians. And she stopped it. I didn't. I let my report get buried because I was afraid of my career, afraid of making waves. She wasn't. And now she's the one on trial while the people who ignored the intelligence get to keep their jobs and their reputations. The room was dead silent. Finch stood, his face flushed. Your Honor, I need to request a recess to review this testimony. Denied, York said flatly. You may cross-examine. Finch approached Pritchard like a predator circling wounded prey. Mr. Pritchard, you filed a dissenting opinion. That's not the same as proving the intelligence was wrong. I proved there were discrepancies that your superiors reviewed and found it insufficient to halt the operation, correct? They didn't review them. They buried them. That's speculation. That's what happened. Finch shifted tactics. How long have you worked for DIA? 6 years. And in those 6 years, how many times have you testified in a court-martial? Never. How many times have you publicly contradicted your chain of command? Never. Until now. Interesting timing, don't you think? Right after a viral news story makes this case politically inconvenient? Pritchard's jaw tightened. I'm here because it's the truth. or because you want your 15 minutes of fame?" "Objection," Holt said. "Counsel is badgering the witness." "Sustained." "Move on, Colonel Finch." But Finch had made his point. He walked back to his table, leaving Pritchard looking shaken but defiant. York turned to the witness. "Mr. Pritchard, do you have documentation supporting your claims?" "Yes, sir." He opened his messenger bag and pulled out a tablet. "I brought copies of my original assessment, the thermal analysis, and the email chain showing my report was overwritten." He handed the tablet to a bailiff. "Who brought it to the panel?" York scrolled through the files, his expression growing darker with each page. Major Wells leaned over to look, her face pale. Lieutenant Colonel Moss, the former pilot, stared at the screen like he was watching a plane crash in slow motion. Finally, York looked up. "Colonel Finch, did the prosecution have access to this information?" Finch stood slowly. "Your Honor, I was provided the intelligence summaries that were part of the operational record. If there were dissenting assessments, they were not included in the materials I received." "That's convenient," Moss muttered, loud enough to be heard. York set the tablet down. "This court is in recess until tomorrow morning. I want full disclosure of all intelligence materials related to this operation, including any dissenting opinions, contradictory data, or communications about the authorization process. If anyone in the chain of command withheld relevant information from this proceeding, there will be consequences." His gavel came down like thunder. The courtroom exploded into chaos. Reporters rushed for the exits. Protesters outside erupted in cheers. And Amelia sat at the defense table, watching it all unfold with the calm of someone who had known all along that the truth was on her side, that it had just taken everyone else this long to see it. Holt leaned over, whispering. "That was unexpected." Amelia allowed herself the smallest smile. "Was it? You knew?" "I knew the intelligence was wrong. I knew someone somewhere had to have questioned it. I just didn't know who." "Well," Holt said, gathering her papers, "now they know you were right." "Maybe," Amelia said quietly. "But this isn't over yet." She was right, because while the intelligence fraud was now exposed, there was still one question the court-martial had to answer. Did being right justify what she'd done? Tomorrow would determine whether conscience was enough. The recess lasted 36 hours instead of overnight. Behind closed doors, military investigators tore through classified files, email servers, and communication logs. What they found was worse than anyone had anticipated. The intelligence fabrication hadn't been an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern. Over 18 months, Redstone Analytics had submitted dozens of target assessments, each one inflating threats, each one pushing for aggressive action, each one generating fees for continued operations. And someone in the chain of command had been letting it happen. By the time court reconvened on Saturday morning, 3 senior intelligence officers had been placed on administrative leave. The contractor was under federal investigation, and General Tobias Creel had been conspicuously absent from the base for 2 days, reportedly consulting with Pentagon officials. The courtroom felt different now. The air was charged with tension that had nothing to do with Amelia's fate and everything to do with how much institutional rot had just been exposed. Journalists filled every available seat, their cameras trained on the defense table where Amelia sat in the same pressed uniform, the same calm expression, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Colonel York called the court to order, his face carved from stone. "Before we proceed, I want to address the developments of the past 2 days. This court has reviewed the intelligence materials that were belatedly provided. The discrepancies are significant and troubling. However," he paused, his eyes sweeping the room, "this trial is not about the quality of intelligence. It is about whether Captain Strand's actions constituted lawful conduct under military law." He let that sink in. "The intelligence may have been flawed, That does not automatically vindicate disobedience of orders. We will proceed with the case as charged. Colonel Finch, you may continue. Finch stood, and if he was rattled by the revelations, he didn't show it. He was a professional, and professionals adapted. Your Honor, the prosecution rests. We have demonstrated that Captain Strand willfully disobeyed orders, interfered with military operations, and threatened friendly forces. Whatever the quality of the intelligence, she had no authority to make the decisions she made. That is the issue before this court. York nodded. Captain Holt, you may present your defense. Holt rose. The defense calls Captain Amelia Strand. A ripple of anticipation moved through the gallery. Until now, Amelia had remained silent, a figure at the center of the storm, but never its voice. Now she would speak. She stood and walked to the witness stand, her movements precise and unhurried. She was sworn in, stated her name and rank, and sat with her hands folded in her lap. Holt approached. Captain Strand, can you describe what you saw when you approached the village in the Talmere corridor? Amelia's voice was steady, clear. I saw approximately 20 structures arranged around a central courtyard. Residential buildings with laundry hanging outside. A cooking fire with smoke rising. 6 children playing with a ball. 2 women preparing food. 1 man carrying supplies. No vehicles. No fortifications. No weapons visible. What did you conclude? That this was a civilian settlement, not a military target. And what did you do? I informed command that I could not confirm hostile activity and requested verification of the intelligence. What was their response? I was ordered to mark the target regardless of my assessment. Holt walked closer. Why didn't you comply? Amelia met her eyes. Because marking that target would have resulted in the deaths of non-combatants. The rules of engagement are explicit. We do not strike civilian targets. Following that order would have violated the laws of armed conflict, even though it came from a general officer. Even then, an illegal order is not a lawful order, regardless of who gives it. Holt nodded. What went through your mind when you decided to return to the corridor? For the first time, Amelia's composure flickered not with doubt, but with emotion carefully controlled. I knew that if I didn't act, those people would die. I knew what it would cost me. But I also knew that I couldn't live with myself if I did nothing. You locked your weapon system onto a friendly aircraft. Why? To force them to abort. I had no intention of firing. I needed them to believe I would, so they'd stand down long enough for Commander reassess. Did it work? Yes, the strike was aborted. The village was not hit. Holt returned to her table, then turned back. Captain Strand, do you regret your actions? Amelia didn't hesitate. No, even knowing it would end your career? Even knowing that. Why? Because 200 people are still alive. That matters more than my career. More than my freedom. More than anything else. The courtroom was silent. Even the journalists had stopped typing. Holt sat down. No further questions. Finch rose for cross-examination, his expression carefully neutral. Captain Strand, you've testified that you believe the order was illegal. But you're not a lawyer, are you? No. You're not an intelligence analyst? No, you're a pilot. Your expertise is flying aircraft, not interpreting international law or evaluating intelligence assessments. Correct? Correct. So when you decided the order was illegal, you were making a legal determination you weren't qualified to make. I was making a moral determination based on what I could see with my own eyes. But the military doesn't run on individual moral determinations, does it? It runs on orders, chain of command, and trust that your superiors have information you don't. That trust has to go both ways. If the orders violate the law, I have an obligation to refuse. Finch paced. You keep saying the order was illegal. But at the time you refused, You had no proof the intelligence was wrong. You had your visual assessment against multiple intelligence reports. You chose to trust yourself over the system. Isn't that arrogance? It's responsibility. Responsibility? You threatened to shoot down fellow pilots doing their jobs. You jammed military communications. You forced the abort of an authorized operation. You put your judgment above everyone else's. That's not responsibility, Captain. That's ego. Amelia's expression didn't change. I did what I was trained to do. Assess the situation, make the call, and act on it. That's what pilots do every day. The only difference is that this time, my call contradicted what command wanted to hear. And you think that justifies hijacking a $50 million fighter jet? I didn't hijack anything. I flew my assigned aircraft to prevent a war crime. You keep using that phrase. War crime. Do you have any idea how serious that accusation is? Yes, which is why I was willing to risk everything to prevent it. Finch stared at her for a long moment, then shook his head. No further questions. Amelia returned to her seat. Holt leaned over, whispering, "That was good. You stayed calm. I told the truth. That's all I can do." The trial continued through the afternoon. Holt called character witnesses, fellow pilots who testified to Amelia's judgment, her competence, her 15 years of unblemished service. A flight instructor from her training days. A squadron commander who'd served with her in combat. Each one painted the same picture. Amelia Strand was not reckless. She was not insubordinate. She was the kind of officer who weighed every decision carefully and always put the mission and the people above herself. But Finch dismantled each testimony with surgical precision. He didn't dispute her record. He simply argued that even the best officers could make catastrophic errors in judgment. That competence didn't grant immunity from the law. That heroism in the past didn't excuse insubordination in the present. By late afternoon, both sides had rested. Colonel York addressed the courtroom. Closing arguments will begin Monday morning. This court is adjourned until then. The gavel fell, and the room emptied slowly, people reluctant to leave. As if staying might somehow influence the outcome, Amelia was escorted back to her cell. And for the first time in days, she felt the weight of exhaustion settle over her. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the trial was fading, leaving only the awareness of what came next. In 72 hours, the panel would deliberate. They would weigh the evidence, the testimony, the law, and then they would decide whether she had committed crimes or prevented them. She lay on the cot in her cell, staring at the ceiling, and let her mind drift to the village. She wondered if the children were still playing soccer, if the woman was still cooking, if any of them knew how close they'd come to being erased from existence. Probably not. And that was okay. She hadn't done it for recognition or gratitude. She'd done it because it was right. And in 3 days, she would learn if right was enough. But before the panel could deliver their something unexpected happened. Something that would shift the entire conversation one final time. Because while Amelia waited in her cell for judgment, a crisis was unfolding 200 miles away that would test everything she'd claimed about duty, competence, and the value of trusting your own eyes over orders from people who'd never been there. And this time, the whole world would be watching. The crisis began at 0430 hours on Sunday morning. 14 hours before closing arguments were scheduled to begin. A commercial airliner, Flight 447 from Dubai to Atlanta, had developed catastrophic engine failure over the Rizik Desert, the same hostile airspace where Amelia had flown her missions. 238 passengers, 12 crew members. The plane was losing altitude rapidly, and the nearest safe landing zone was a civilian airstrip in the town of Hadara, 40 miles inside contested territory. The problem was that Hadara sat less than 3 miles from an active conflict zone. Insurgent groups controlled the surrounding area. Landing there meant exposing a commercial aircraft full of civilians to potential attack. Kidnapping, or worse. The alternative was attempting an emergency landing in open desert, which at the plane's current rate of descent would almost certainly result in a catastrophic crash. Command faced an impossible choice: risk the plane trying to reach Hadara, or order it to ditch in the desert and hope rescue could arrive before everyone aboard died from impact or exposure. Neither option was good. At Kerrigan Air Base, the Situation Room erupted into controlled chaos. General Creel had returned from Washington, and despite the investigation swirling around him, he was still operational commander. He stood at the center of the room, surrounded by tactical displays, communication officers, and advisors all shouting over each other. How long until they're on the ground? 18 minutes at current descent rate. What assets do we have in the area? 2 F-35s on patrol, call signs Viper 1 and Viper 2. They can be overhead in 12 minutes. Can they provide cover if the plane lands at Hadara? Negative. Insurgents have anti-aircraft capabilities. We'd be putting the fighters at risk too. Creel's jaw tightened. Then we tell the pilot to ditch in the desert. Scramble rescue helicopters. It's their best chance. Sir, at that altitude and speed, ditching will kill most of the passengers on impact. And landing at Hadara will get them all killed or captured. I'm not risking a hostage situation with 250 civilians. A voice cut through the chaos from the back of the room. There's another option. Everyone turned. Captain Lydia Holt stood in the doorway, still in her dress uniform from the trial. Her face flushed from running. Captain Holt. This is a restricted operations center, someone began. Sir, with respect, you need a pilot who knows that terrain. Someone who can assess the situation in real time and make the call. Not from a satellite feed 200 miles away, but from the air. Creel's eyes narrowed. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting you send Captain Strand. The room went silent. You're out of your mind, Creel said flatly. She's awaiting court-martial for insubordination. She's also the best pilot you have for this situation. She knows the Talmir corridor better than anyone. She's flown combat missions over Hadara. And she's proven she can make judgment calls under pressure when command isn't there to hold her hand. She threatened to shoot down one of our aircraft. And she saved 200 civilians from being bombed. Isn't that exactly the kind of judgment you need right now? One of the tactical officers spoke up, hesitant. General, she does have more experience in that airspace than anyone currently on duty. Creel looked like he'd swallowed glass. Even if I wanted to, she's under detention. And she has no aircraft assigned. She could take mine, a quiet voice said from the corner. Lieutenant Colonel Richard Moss stepped forward, one of the 3 panel members from the court-martial. He was still in civilian clothes, having been off duty when the crisis alert went out. I flew combat missions in that region for 2 years. If Captain Strand says she can assess whether Hadara is viable, I believe her. And my F-35 is fueled and ready on the line. Creel stared at him. You're on the panel judging her case. I'm also a pilot. And right now, 250 people need someone who can make the right call. Politics can wait. The tactical display beeped urgently. Sir, the airliner just reported they're down to 1 engine. They won't make it to the coast. We need a decision now. Creel looked around the room at the faces staring back at him. His career was already hanging by a thread. Authorizing Strand's release would be seen as either desperation or vindication, depending on how it played out. But 250 lives didn't care about his career. Get her here, he said finally. Full flight authorization. But if she deviates from mission parameters, I will personally ensure she never sees daylight again. 10 minutes later, Amelia was pulled from her cell by 2 MPs who gave her no explanation, just orders to move. They drove her across the base at high speed, still in her detention jumpsuit, her hair uncombed, her mind racing through possibilities. When the vehicle stopped outside the operations center, Captain Holt was waiting. "No time for questions," Holt said, handing her a flight suit. "Commercial airliner in distress over the Rozhik Desert. You're being sent to assess whether they can safely land at Hadara." Amelia's eyes widened. "Hadara? That airstrip is practically in insurgent crosshairs, which is why they need someone who knows the area. Get dressed. You have 8 minutes." Amelia changed in a supply room, her fingers moving on autopilot. Flight suit, boots, survival vest. G-suit connections. She felt herself shifting into mission mode, the trial falling away, replaced by the cold clarity of operational focus. When she emerged, Lieutenant Colonel Moss was waiting beside his F-35, already running through pre-flight. "It's fueled and armed," he said simply. "Weapon systems are hot. You'll have tactical command once you're airborne." She looked at him, the man who would help decide her fate in 2 days. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I've been where you are. I've had orders that didn't match what I saw on the ground. And I've wondered if I'd have your courage to do what you did." He stepped back. "Bring them home, Captain." She climbed into the cockpit. The familiar embrace of the ejection seat, the glow of the instruments, the weight of responsibility settling over her shoulders like armor. Tower clearance came immediately. No delays, no questions. "Just Falcon 7, you are cleared for immediate departure." The engines roared to life. The jet surged down the runway. And Amelia was airborne, climbing into the pre-dawn sky with 250 lives depending on her judgment. She pushed the throttle forward, going supersonic, covering the distance to the Rozhik Desert in minutes. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the barren landscape in shades of gold and shadow. "Flight 447, this is Falcon 7. I'm 2 minutes from your position. What's your status?" The pilot's voice was tight with controlled panic. "Falcon 7, we're down to 1 engine, losing altitude at 400 feet per minute. We've got maybe 10 minutes of flight time left." "Copy that. I'm going to overfly Hadara and assess the airstrip." "Stand by." She dove toward the small town, her targeting pod activating, scanning the terrain below. The airstrip appeared, a single runway, cracked and weathered, surrounded by low buildings. Her sensors swept the area, looking for heat signatures, vehicle movements, anything that suggested hostile presence. What she saw made her stomach tighten. 3 trucks parked near the runway perimeter. Thermal signatures indicated at least 15 people in the vicinity. And one of the trucks had what looked like a mounted weapon. "Command, this is Falcon 7. I have visual on Hadara. Possible hostile presence near the airstrip. Recommend diversion to alternate. Negative, Falcon 7. Creel's voice cut in. "There is no alternate. Flight 447 cannot make it anywhere else. Your assessment. Can they land safely or not?" Amelia circled lower, studying the scene more carefully. The people near the trucks weren't taking defensive positions. They were watching, curious. One was waving at her jet. She zoomed in tighter on the mounted weapon. It wasn't a gun. It was a water pump. "Command, I'm revising assessment. The individuals on the ground appear to be civilians. No active hostile intent detected. The airstrip is clear for landing. Are you certain?" She thought about the village, about the children playing soccer, about the difference between what satellite imagery showed and what your own eyes told you when you were actually there. "Affirmative. The airstrip is safe." There was a pause. Then, "Flight 447, you are cleared for emergency landing at Hadara. Falcon 7 will provide cover." The airliner descended, its damaged engine trailing smoke, its approach angle steep and precarious. Amelia flew alongside, her sensors sweeping continuously for any sign of threat. The wheels touched down. The plane bounced once, hard, then settled, racing down the cracked runway. Brakes screaming. It rolled to a stop 300 feet from the end. Intact and safe. Through her canopy, Amelia watched as the emergency exits opened. As passengers began evacuating down the slides. As the civilians on the ground rushed forward, not with weapons, but with water and blankets. Falcon 7. This is Flight 447. We're down safe. All souls accounted for. Thank you. Amelia exhaled slowly. Copy that. Flight 447. Rescue is en route. You're going to be okay. She climbed back to altitude, circling the area until military helicopters arrived to evacuate the passengers. Only then did she turn toward home. When she landed at Kerrigan, the sun was fully up, and the entire base was waiting. General Creel stood on the tarmac as she taxied in. When she shut down the engines and climbed out, he walked forward and stopped 3 feet away. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Then he saluted. Captain Strand, you're remanded back to custody pending verdict, but... He lowered his hand. You did good work today. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't vindication. But it was acknowledgement. And from Creel, that was something. 2 days later, the panel delivered their verdict. Not guilty on all charges. The courtroom erupted. Outside, protesters cheered. Inside, Amelia stood quietly as Colonel York read the decision, explaining that the evidence showed her actions, while unorthodox, were consistent with her duty to prevent unlawful targeting of civilians. She was reinstated with full rank and honors. Jenna's charges were dropped, and an investigation was launched into the intelligence failures that had nearly caused a massacre. 6 months later, Amelia stood on the observation deck at Kerrigan Air Base, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Her uniform was pressed, her ribbons including a new one, the Air Force Commendation Medal for Valor. A young lieutenant approached, nervous. Captain Strand, I just wanted to say, what you did inspired me to become a pilot, to trust my judgment even when it's hard. Amelia smiled. Then trust it, but never stop questioning it either. That's the balance. The lieutenant saluted and walked away. Amelia turned back to the horizon, thinking about the village she'd saved, the airliner she'd guided home, and all the invisible moments where people made choices that determined whether others lived or died. She'd paid the price for hers. But 450 people, 200 in a village, 250 on a plane were alive because she'd been willing to pay it, and that, she thought, was worth everything. If you found this story meaningful, consider subscribing to hear more stories about courage, conscience, and the people who refuse to look away when it matters most. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.